All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming. So today we're going to be talking about applying for graduate school. So particularly, you're getting close to the end and you're planning to apply to graduate school either maybe this summer or this fall, maybe even this spring, kind of depending on when your program is. And we'll kind of go over that. So I'm James Whitt, the advisor for psychology. With me today are three of our faculty. So we have Dr. Jeanette Bennett, Dr. Sara Levens, and Dr. Hannah Peach. They are going to help me kind of give you a little bit more information on kind of the faculty side of things. So they're some of the people who review applications and things for some of our graduate programs, so they can kind of give you some inside information on that. So just a quick overview of kind of what we'll go over. So we'll quickly go over kind of what the application looks like. We'll go over some of the common questions that students have about applying for graduate school and things like that. And then we'll have some time for you all to ask any questions that you have. So we'll go ahead and get started talking about the application. So a quick overview of it is you have the actual application. It's going to be very similar to the application you did for any undergraduate program. So you kind of fill in your information. There is typically a fee for it. You'll include test scores, transcripts, a resume or a CV. We'll talk a little bit more about some of that later. You'll also typically have a personal statement and recommendation letters. Some programs also do require a secondary writing sample, and we'll kind of talk about that. But typically a writing sample might be like a paper for Research Methods 2 or another class that you feel very confident in that can kind of display your writing and research or kind of whatever skills that are necessary for that program. And then the other thing to keep in mind as you're kind of looking at applications are when the deadlines are. So it'll vary from program to program, but typically most doctorate programs that start in the fall will have a fall start date. So for example, if you're wanting to start fall of 24, you'd be looking to apply sometime in fall of 23. For masters, a lot of their programs have a deadline in spring, the fall before. So if you wanted to start fall of 24, you'd be looking to apply by at least spring of 24. So we'll quickly talk about test scores. The two main tests that programs will kind of look for are the MAT and the GRE. They're not required for every program, especially at the master's level. A lot of programs are no longer requiring either test scores. You still can do them if you want to. And if you have a particularly low GPA or something like that, having pretty good test scores can kind of show that you still have that ability and can kind of help offset that a little bit. The MAT, it's the Miller's analogy test. So it's just 120 analogies scored on a 200 to 600 point scale, and it takes about an hour. The GRE is a little bit more intensive. So if you took the SAT, think of the GRE as kind of the graduate school equivalent. So there's going to be two sections of quantitative. So it's going to focus on math, algebra, things like that. If you did take the SAT, it's all the same math that you took on that test. So there's no additional math that you'll have to do. So you don't have to worry about like calculus or anything like that. You'll have two sections of verbal. So this is kind of like reading comprehension. You'll get short passages and have kind of questions about them, things like that. And then you'll also have two sections of writing that you'll either have to write an argument about or write a persuasive essay and things like that. And then you'll have one additional section that is unscored, which will be either quantitative or verbal. So you will have 5 sections of quantitative and verbal kind of combined. Of those, only 4 will be scored for your test, and you won't know which one goes to which. You will obviously know that if you get 3 quantitative, one of those is going to be the unscored one and not your verbal, and vice versa. This one is a little bit longer, so it is about 4 hours. So if you do have the option, typically students will prefer to take the MAT if that is an option, just because it is a little bit shorter and things like that. And then the GRE is graded on a scale of 130 to 170. While that is an option, typically you'll look at the percentage because that's going to be a little bit more streamlined. So for example, if you took the GRE and got a 140 and 140, it'll also say like 140 and then also 60%. So that means you scored higher than 60% of the people who took that same test that time. So that's typically what programs will look at, just because the particular actual score on the scale of 130 to 170 will vary from test to test how like intensive it is. So we'll talk about the resume and CV. So the biggest thing is just highlight those relevant skills the program's looking for on your resume or CV. So if it's a research intensive program, highlight your research experience as much as you can. Same for leadership, counseling, communication, things like that. The main difference between a resume and a CV is your CV is going to be typically longer. Resume, you're typically looking at 1 to 2 pages, and it's very much more focused on kind of your education, job, career, internship, that sort of thing. Your CVs, it's a curriculum vitae. So this one's going to focus on not only your kind of education and your job, but also your research experience, your presentation experience. If you've taught any classes, if you TA, you can kind of all put that on there. And it's just a very lengthier document. So there's no real limit to how long a CV could be. So depending on what your program is looking for, you might want to include some of that stuff. Personal statement. So generally a personal statement is going to be about kind of your background and interests, why you're applying to this program and what you're planning to do afterwards. Depending on the program, they may also include a specific prompt that they want you to kind of answer in your personal statement, or they may include specifics like, please list at least 2 faculty that you want to work with, things like that. So if they do include some of that stuff in their prompt, make sure that you're including it. That's kind of the biggest thing, because if you don't include that, that already shows that you're kind of not being able to follow those guidelines that they've set in place. You also want to make sure that you have, proper formatting, proper grammar and spelling and things like that. If you do struggle with any of that, always have as many people as you can look over it. You can always go out to the Career Center and they can look over it for some of the content and things like that. You can have the Writing Resource Center look it over for kind of grammar and things like that as well. And then recommendations. So this is kind of the big stickler point for a lot of students. So you do typically need at least 3 recommendations from typically your faculty. It does vary by program. So some programs may be less, some may not include any, but 3 is the most common. They can be from any discipline. So don't feel like just because you are a psych student, you're limited to just psych. Depending on the program you're wanting to go for, it may make more sense for you to do kind of a mix, or maybe not even any psych professors. It kind of just really depends on what the program you're looking for. And you want to align your recommenders to what program you're looking for. So for example, if you're wanting to apply to like an IO psychology program, you're probably going to want to include 1 to 2 psychology faculty if possible. But if you also had like a business minor or something, you could also include one of your business professors if you have a good relationship with them. And that could also be a good recommender for you. You will want to use mostly academic references, especially if it's a research intensive program, just because what they're really looking for in recommendation letters is this student going to be prepared for graduate level work? And will they be prepared to kind of go through that process? And you'll want to make sure that who you're asking, you have a meaningful relationship for. So if it's just a professor you had a class with, you never really talked to them, things like that, that's probably not going to be a great person for your recommendation letter. You want somebody that you have a meaningful kind of tie with. So if you've been a TA or an RA with them, if you're in a student organization, you could talk to whoever your advisor is if you've kind of been very involved in that. If you have an internship or a job that's relevant, you could ask your supervisor there. Even if you don't have those specifically, even if you've just had a professor for a couple classes and you've kind of spoken to them during class and after class and during office hours and kind of talked about like what you're interested in, kind of your plans for graduate school, things like that, that can still get you kind of a good recommendation letter just by getting that connection with them. So don't feel like you have, if you haven't done, a TA or RA or something like that, you can't find somebody to recommend you. It's really just you having to make that effort to kind of connect with them, make sure that they kind of know what you want to do and things like that. Kind of tying into that is when you do ask somebody to be a recommender for you, if they don't have a super meaningful relationship with you, or maybe they're not aware of everything you're doing, it's helpful to provide like your resume or your CV, your personal statement, letting them know what program you're interested in. That way they can also kind of help you kind of bring yourself to the best light in their letter. And they can also tell you, hey, based on kind of that, I might not be the best person for this. You may want to look for somebody else in X, Y, or Z, or, oh, I see on your resume that you did this. They may be a better fit for your recommender than I would be, and things like that. And the other thing is make sure that you give them plenty of time. If you can, give them about a month. A little bit more is not going to hurt, but you definitely want to give them a little bit time so that they can kind of review everything, make sure that they get a good letter for you. If you kind of do it last minute, if they say yes even, because they could say no if it's very last minute, it's going to be a little bit more rushed and may not highlight you as well as they could have if you gave them a little bit more time. So that's kind of a general overview of the application. Any questions kind of about that process or anything there?
I have a question about like if I'm planning on applying for a next spring master's program, would it still be better for me to get my references now, and like will they still be like accepted for next spring? Or should I wait a little bit longer? Like, 'cause I graduate this semester, so I just didn't know what would be the best way to go about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Sarah, did you have something you wanted to say?
One of the common recommendations that we give is for students that are expecting to apply later to let their recommenders, their potential letter recommenders know now. Because what can happen is you can have a connection and you can know a faculty member reasonably well, and you can be, but then a year passes and sometimes it can be a couple of years because life gets in the way. So it's always better to reach out now and potentially discuss the possibility of writing a draft ahead of time, or them sort of making notes or anything like that, so that they have something on paper to refer back to when it's time to write your letter.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the other thing that maybe I didn't specify really well on this is typically in the application process, you'll put in the contact information for who you want to be your recommender, and that's going to prompt the system to automatically send typically an email to the faculty member or whoever. And then from there, they'll get access to kind of upload their letter and things like that. So you won't actually get the official prompt until you actually apply and do the application. But you, like Dr. Levens said, you do want to kind of go ahead and get them in the know on kind of what you're planning to do before you do that. You don't want them to get that email and be like, oh, I haven't talked to them in a couple weeks or a couple months and didn't know that this was happening.
Yeah, so Dr. Levens, I agree with you. I think the sooner the better you can ask, and then you might even have more time where your faculty member could recommend you do a couple of things that could boost your resume, and also try to keep in touch, right? If you ask them a semester or a year in advance, send regular updates. This is how things are going. I mean, the more time we have, the better, right? Because letters can be time consuming, and we want to make it as tailored as possible to highlight your skill set and how you are a good fit for the program. So I would say the sooner the better.
Yeah. And the better we know you, actually, the more challenging it is to write letters, just because they're longer. We can actually talk a lot more. And for students that are approaching us with just classes, like I actually have a bit of a template for students that are reaching out to me for a letter of recommendation after taking a particular course. And I'm very clear in what I can let them know and say, well, this is all I can comment on for the purposes of this, for your letter, unless I get to know you more, or you give me more information and things like that. So it's helpful to have that conversation early, just so you sort of know where you stand and how much more you could potentially do to strengthen your letter of recommendation. The other piece that it's really helpful is if you're reaching out to professors, you have to absolutely give them sufficient notice. So generally, you'd want to give us a month if you're hitting less than that, then you should be knowing and sort of preparing this far ahead of time, and you're working on your application and things like that. And sometimes, especially for students that we know really well, our letters can be multiple pages long, single spaced. And the first time we write a letter is the most time consuming. And to to find that chunk of time and thinking of how many other students are also asking for letters of recommendation at the same time, then it's really essential to just give us as much notice as possible. And so a month is good, more is even better, just giving professors that you know a heads up and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and we also had a question in the chat about after graduating with a bachelor's, can you go straight into a PhD or other doctorate program, or do you have to go through a master's first? And I will say, so that depends on the program. So there are some doctorate programs that do require a master's, but there are a lot of doctorate programs that you can either earn a master's at the same time, or you can go straight from your bachelor's to that doctorate program. So it just kind of varies from program to program. And on the program's either website or their admissions information, they should clearly list what the requirements are for that. Yeah, and we'll have a little bit more time for questions at the end, but we'll go over some of the common questions that students typically have when they're kind of applying for programs. So the first one is, how important are test scores and GPA, and can I still get in even if I do have a low GPA or my test scores aren't that great?
So I can address this one, start at least get the ball rolling. So as COVID changed our world, test scores and not GPA, because everyone has that, but test scores have really been called into question. That was happening before the pandemic, but then the pandemic kind of brought it to the front, like, why are we making people do this? So if they're optional, they're good, you should submit them. If it's optional and you're like, so, I would probably not, because what that does is it gives information that somebody might potentially include in their thought of looking at you as an applicant. And some people are very still tied to them at that they're meaningful. As you may be telling about the way I'm talking about it, I think test scores are they are not indicative of people's success in graduate school at master's or PhD level. So I find it I'm actually glad that there's been this movement in academia to kind of let them go. There's a lot of inherent biases in them where certain populations just don't perform well, and it has nothing to do with the individual's abilities. It has everything to do with their culture, maybe other pieces of their language, other things that they just aren't aligning with the test makers who designed the test. So low GPA, that is, depending on what kind of program you're applying to, you should definitely look at what their mean GPA is, or their average GPA of what people are accepted. That means they accept people above it and people below it. If you're very far below it as an undergrad, I would suggest you likely take some additional courses at the either undergrad level to boost your GPA, or get into a master's program where there isn't a requirement for GPA. And there are programs like that, and then perform really well at the graduate level. Undergrad is a time everyone knows is a transitional time, and students sometimes have, stumbles and falls and semesters that are really bad, maybe 2 semesters that are really bad. And that really hurts. But that doesn't seal the deal on who you are as a human. So I would say definitely try to figure out how to enhance those pieces. The other piece is focusing in on your GPA for your major. If that is exceptionally good, then maybe the other gen ed courses or other things that you might have taken would be less important, but it's important to highlight those things. And if it is another thing you choose to do, make sure your letter writers talk about it and address it. People who know you really well, because they can help contextualize what a number means, where just looking at a number doesn't have that. So hopefully that's helpful. And Dr. Levens, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I can also add that you can also address it in your statement. So you can talk about, like, I went through this particular period challenging time, and think how many people are going to have that in their applications right now due to COVID. So, so to a certain extent, this is really opening up all sorts of, like things that were always there all along, but are now a massive amount of people are going to be doing, because we have sort of collective trauma instead of more individual level, which is what usually occurs. So I agree 100% with Dr. Bennett, and that GPA focus, looking at the differences in discipline, you can talk about the evolution of your interests in your letter to have that also match with, or align with how you might have differences in grades as a function of earlier interests versus later interests. And having your letter writers talk about it, you talk about it, and then if there's a lot of time in between stuff too, that anytime you can come back, take classes, or do just address it, even if there hasn't been a whole lot of time. Or excuse me, if there has been time, but you've been doing something else, to even sort of say, hey, I've been in this, I'm now coming back, where you have other skills and experiences that clearly show that you have been successful in, in the key aspects of life that you were sort of interested in pursuing. So don't be afraid to tell your story.
And with that too, you can look at your overall GPA versus your major GPA, right? And that may be something that, like Dr. Levin said, that your letter writers can talk about, or that you talk about. You may have kind of had it tough the first couple of years of Jeanette, and then you got into your major and you really excelled. So that's something else to kind of keep in mind that can extend past that just being a number.
Great, thank you all for that. So we'll move on to our next kind of common question. So this one's more about the application. So do reviewers look at the whole application? What's the most important part of the application?
Your personal statement. Of course, we look at the whole thing. Of course we do. But just your personal statement, that's where we get to know you. That's usually what we go to first. And then you're probably your CV.
And those two documents too,
recommendation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And those documents are really helpful in helping to see if you as the applicant are a fit for the faculty members that you're applying to, which is one of the most important parts.
Thank you actually for bringing that up, Dr. Peach, because I think that's something that a lot of students don't realize, and that when students are applying, we're not just evaluating you on sort of this, what you may be thinking, like, am I good enough for this program? You apply, depending upon the type of program, you may be actually applying to work with specific faculty members. Or if you're applying to programs, they will take, like our master's program, if it's not, pairing still occurs or matching still occurs on a faculty to master student ratio. And if students are applying to the master's program and not signaling who they might be interested in working with, then those people might not even get their application to review. So it's, we have lots of faculty, and if it's listed in there, like, okay, here for this person, we get tagged, we get pulled out. We know that there's applications that are there waiting for us to review, and we'll be thinking about open spaces in our labs. And if we have open spaces, we'll be interested in looking out for those. But if you haven't linked us, if you're applying to a program without having done specific research in terms of who you would like to work with, who you would like to train with, who you would like to gain experience from, then you are not likely to get into the program. And be very honest with you. So fit is just really essential. And so it can also be really helpful, particularly for doctoral programs. Not all faculty do this, but you can email ahead and say, hey, look, I'm interested in applying. Can we meet? So some faculty do and some faculty don't. It's personal preference, and it's also based upon the sheer number of applications that they get. Like I have one colleague that won't do it because she will often get 60 applications just to apply to work with her. So, so some of those, so there are all sorts of dynamics that are involved in there, but it's helpful to reach out and signal your interest, because even if they won't, then they'll be potentially on the lookout for your application. And then in your application, you want to talk about your interests, and you might be looking on the faculty's website and to find out some of the stuff that they're doing. And you're like, oh, this is great. These things go together. And So that's really good. That's exactly the stuff that you want to do, but you want to also pay attention to timing, because if you are looking at research that was done years and years ago, then that is not likely to be research that they are still working on. So you want to pay attention to recent publications and maybe even do a search for their name to see what they're sort of coming up with that is really sort of more hot off the press, because that's the stuff that they're interested in working with now. And I will pass this on to Dr. Bennett and Peach to add more details.
Yeah, thank you. I totally 100% agree with the things that have been said. I just wanted to add that many of the things that has been brought up is really focusing in on the PhD, more research-oriented tracks, where matching is really, really important. And that is, I can't understate that. But there are other graduate programs like master's level that, even though our program here is still very much tied to research interests, there are applied master's programs. There are other places that this fit piece to a faculty member is not as important, but more of your fit to the program and what the goals of that program are, right? So if you're applying to, a master's program that's focused in on clinical psychology, and you're writing about wanting to be an experimental psychologist, like that doesn't fit, and no one's going to really look at your application. So you have to do a lot of work, I think, in tailoring who you are. And we kind of talked a little bit about this, but it's easy to tell very quickly if you are just sending a generic statement to multiple schools, very easily. And when I see that, I don't bother really reading much beyond that once I've made that decision, because there are, like Dr. Levens mentioned, some of us have many applications we're looking at, and many are very qualified. Like if you don't get into graduate school the first time around, it's probably not because you're not qualified. It's because you just didn't find that niche of meeting, especially for PhD programs. And that is, how do you make yourself fit to something you can't really put your finger on, is very difficult. And that's why it often takes more than one attempt to get into PhD programs if you're on that wavelength right now. So don't be disheartened if you don't hit the first time, but also be strategic, because as Mr. Whitt mentioned, every application costs money, right? And it can get very expensive if you are not putting the effort in ahead of time. So I'll stop there, because I think we'll probably get into this elsewhere.
And there is some luck involved, like the person that you want to work with, are they taking students that year? So there's, and you think that there's a really great fit, but the faculty member happens to be going in a slightly different direction that you didn't know about. So don't take it personally if things don't work out, because that's not likely what happened at all. And that's I just want you guys to know that. We do have a question from in the chat. How do we basically make connections with professors online, especially who transferred to UNCC during the pandemic? I have some thoughts, but I've spoken a bit, so I want to make sure. Want to take it away, Dr. Peach? I think you're still on mute.
I think one brain, everybody's in that boat, because I've had a lot of students. I'll be interested, Dr. Levens, to hear some suggestions you have, because I feel like all these students have asked me. And so first of all, you're in the same boat, right? Everybody's sort of struggling with that. And I think coming back now, I've had a lot of students in person be so excited to talk after class and to use this time. So I think just being very purposeful, going to Zoom office hours, reaching out to faculty, making sure we know who you are, if it's online, especially if it's asynchronous. So now's the time to start being very, very purposeful, taking multiple classes with the same faculty member, so you have more opportunities to get to know them, reaching out about teaching assistantship opportunities. The more visible you can be, the more likely you are to network, so those faculty can get to know you.
I think I'll add, because your recommendations for students how do we connect with professors? So it's not just in terms of connecting for professors for the letters of recommendation, but also just how do we connect with them to get started and get to know them better, to be involved in research and connect with them for their labs. And so many of the same exact behaviors, actions hold. But you can also, if you have an instructor that you like for class, be like, I really enjoyed your class. Can we talk sometime? I really enjoyed your class. Do you have any open positions in your lab? Working over the summer, volunteer. One of the nice things about the pandemic is that now we do have a lot more remote work and we have remote lab meetings. And so wouldn't be surprised in the future if we kind of continue doing some hybrid formats of that, so that we can continue to involve, students who might not be located nearby. So it's possible that you can still sort of leverage some of the online mechanisms that we have for learning, for connecting with faculty as well. So there are still a fair number of opportunities. It is harder to potentially connect with research right now because our research is in unusual spaces due to the pandemic. And so our lab activities have often been dramatically altered. So that part can be a little bit of a challenge, but persistence still gets you pretty much everywhere you want to go.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question and for talking about that. The big takeaway I want everyone to kind of realize from talking about applications and everything is just, as you heard, GPA and test scores and things like that, those kind of numerical things are not the end all be all. They're a lot of times not even that big of a consideration for some of these applications. As you heard, typically some of the more kind of personal things where you've got your personal statement, your CV, things that you have a little bit more control over, those are going to kind of be your biggest ticket in. So definitely kind of focusing on those. And we've already talked a little bit about this, but our last question that we've kind of already gotten some questions about is fit. So how do you determine fit with a faculty member or a program? And is it okay if my experience and my background isn't an exact match for what I'm planning to do in my program or with a potential faculty member?
So I would have kind of 3 kind of connected suggestions. So the first is you do have to figure out, what do you like in psychology, right? What would you have fun researching for 2 years or 4 years or 6 years? And then when you're looking at programs, see what your general interests are. How can you, again, as I think Dr. Levens, you said this, tailoring things, how can you tailor what you want to do to faculty in that program? So I knew I liked sleep. So when I was looking at programs, I'd say, oh gosh, well, this person's doing stuff with cardiovascular health. And I think that looking at sleep and heart disease is very important. And how can I talk about my interests and how that could be a benefit to the work that this researcher is already doing? So tailoring your true interests, but also keeping in mind that you want to present who you really are and what you really want to do. If you kind of fake who you are as an applicant, right, and then you get matched with this person, it's going to be a disaster, right? Because now you're faking the research you want to do or who you are. And with that, for me personally, I felt really fortunate when I was matched with my faculty member that not only did our research align, but the personality and the mentorship style was a very good fit. So I always tell students to ask some questions. And what does it look like to be a graduate student? Are you very hands-on? Do you tend to let the grad student pick their deadlines, or are you? So I think that finding that match is really helpful, because your faculty advisor, particularly in a PhD program, has a massive impact on your experience and your timeline and your productivity. So it's very, very important. It almost feels like speed dating when you're going through it at first. So the more information you can gather and the better you can get to know them, you'll be able to make a well-informed decision about it.
So we talked a little bit about fit already, and I get some of this. So I will also give some of the same advice that I also give to my honor students that reach out, or honor students that reach out to me about finding a faculty member to work with, because the fit elements are there and some of the approach is really similar. So first, you want to do some research on the faculty and think like, okay, who are you, who does something that you find interesting? And so if you are interested in going to counseling, health, whatever, you can look for the people there that have work that you find interesting, and then really think about why you find it interesting. How does that that why part is really, really important. You don't want to just say, I like this. You know, here's why, here's the things that have contributed to that. And so, and in terms of experience and background, this is actually a little bit more of a complex question, because when it comes to matching, some, you know, for me, for example, I look for people who actually have different experiences and different perspectives. Like, I already have my own. I'm not trying to make mini me's when I train graduate students. You know, we want you to become independent researchers, investigators, scientists, practitioners, sort of whatever, you know, it's meant to sort of prepare you. And so, so I look for people who I think I will work well with, and who I think, you know, will be receptive to learning, you know, match. I'm more of an active involved mentor. So I talk actively about my mentoring style when I'm meeting with students, whether they're coming for my lab or for, you know, potential graduate training. And I try to find people that bring different perspectives. I want to learn from students as much as I want students to learn from me. And so, I like to have there be, you know, differences, but also it can be really nice sometimes to have someone who's like, oh, wow, here's someone that has some of the same background I do. I haven't been able to work with some of this stuff in a while. Someone who has some of the traditional training, you know. So there's also, we actually really like, I mean, personally, there's a full range, but some faculty are really looking for, you know, depending upon the type of program, you know, if you're applying to clinical psychology, there are particular skills that are going to be critical for clinical psychologists. So think about the skills that you would need for the profession that you're intending to work towards. And those are some of the things that you want to demonstrate and think about building as you're moving forward. A final piece is, oftentimes, students will come, whether it's for graduate school or but less so for graduate school, but oftentimes for undergraduate research experience. And they say, I want to find a faculty mentor who will help me do this research or answer this research question. And that is, and that automatically is harder, because we have existing programs of research. And one of the things that students don't necessarily realize is these programs of research have been in place for years and evolve very, you know, dynamically, but then also very slowly. So it can be a fairly complex thing in terms of how all these pieces can kind of fit together. So if you have interest, one of the things I really think about is like that each faculty member and each program generally has their buffet of their options. You know, here's what I have, you know, and what I want to know when I have students work with me, here's all the pieces I have. Tell me what you're interested in of these pieces. And then that's when we talk about, you know, that match and like, okay, what would you bring to this? And here's some, you know, so those are the pieces, but it is much less frequent. It does occur, but it is much less frequent that a student will come in and want to do this, and that just happens to align with what that faculty member wants to do.
One of the things I want to identify is that when you're trying to show fit in the application, right? So there were some really great comments about like trying to understand the faculty members' mentoring style and how they manage graduate students. Those are great interview questions. So one of the things, Mr. Whitt, is there like I've been asked for an interview, now what? Session. We should probably have one, because that would be, we could address all that specific stuff, because it's a different beast than on paper, right? So an application is, you're just this piece of paper, or maybe many pages of paper electronically on people's screens. So how do you get yourself to identify that you are a match, right? And again, as I mentioned earlier, like that's a hard moving target, because what I'm looking for versus what Dr. Levens is looking for versus what Dr. Peach would be looking for is going to be different. So it takes time. I don't want to, if you're looking for a place where you're going to commit 5 to 6 years of your life, You need to spend, I would tell you, a year researching the program you want to go to, the faculty you want to work with. And that might seem like an exaggeration, but it's not. And if you have a very specific window that you're interested in, it's going to even take longer to get into that, because there's, so like I have a graduate student, so someone who's in my lab and then went to, is in graduate school now studying the very specific thing that she came to me. And I was like, well, I don't study that, girl, but I can help you develop skills still to get you towards your goal. And then you're going to have to do a lot of work to figure out how to get into the program you want to. She only applied to 5 programs because that was it, of places that had what all the pieces that she wanted. And she landed, first time around, she landed the perfect program and the perfect mentor. She still seems to be doing okay, and she's almost done with her first year. So yay, like it's possible to do it, but you have to put a lot of effort. She took 18 months of research to figure out which programs, which faculty. She did all that pre-work that Dr. Levens mentioned, like reaching out to the faculty members, creating a connection, even if it's just email, that they see your name. That's going to put you above. They can't stop that subjective, unconscious attention that they now have. Oh, there's that name. I saw that before. Where did I see that? And then it just happens, right? This is how the mind works. The other piece is, when you're doing your research, identify your program you're interested in. That's one way. And then look at what the faculty are doing. Or go based on the research you're interested in and find the faculty that you love their work, and if apply to them, or see where they went, right? So like there's all these ways in which you can kind of locate, I don't know if that's the right word, but whatever, ping all these different pieces to see the trajectory, because each one of us that is here today have a different process that we went through graduate school, and different backgrounds and different experiences. None of us followed the same path. And there are multiple paths. That's a thing. Last thing I want you to suggest, 2 things. Make sure when you are applying to a program, you identify at least 2 faculty members that you're interested in working with, because many places want students who can come in and engage with more than 1 faculty member, because that helps interdisciplinarity, it helps growth of the program, quality of development. Last thing I want you to say is, if we mentioned emailing faculty, if the faculty have a website where they have graduate students on their website, I would reach out to them, because that is the way that, even if it may be the faculty member, I would reach out to both. Let's just say, if you reach out to, you should reach out to the faculty member and then the graduate students. But like, so don't just email the graduate students, but reach out to faculty, and then also graduate students if it's on their website, because those individuals will give you probably more information about graduate school and what that program's like, without even you like necessarily applying, because they can share like, what is it like to be a student there? And that can help you decide whether or not it's like, do I want to move halfway across the country, or do I want to move to the West Coast from the East Coast to go to this program? And you might find out, oh, nope, and I'm not even bother applying, right? So that's it. So I'm gonna stop there.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I'll also add, even if you're interested in like an applied program, so for example, I know a lot of students are interested in kind of like counseling and things like that. You can do a lot of similar stuff when you're researching programs for that. Instead of looking up a particular researcher, you can look up like somebody that you either know, or you're like, oh, I saw this job. Let me find some people who did this job. Oh, they got their master's in this, things like that. So you can always look up people on like LinkedIn and things like that, and see what their education and their background is, and try and find either that same program or a similar program. So a lot of these strategies will work regardless of the particular program or what you're interested in.
I do have one thing to add, and I think that there are some differences in approach and expectations between master's and doctoral programs. Like for doctoral programs, you have to do the research. This is a terminal degree. It is like you don't want to be starting one of this program or have this, because it's a long-term mentorship and partnership. You can be working with this person for anywhere from 5 to 8, even 9 years. Sometimes it takes a while, because you're trying to go as far as you can possibly kind of go in terms of, for this is, if the PhD is is a unique and special thing because because of how it fits within the whole structure of academia. Only PhDs can make other PhDs. And so so doctoral programs have a different perspective in terms of fit in this and that because of some of the structure in them of how that sort of fits within that. The master's programs some of them are more terminal and some of them are designed to actually be a step towards PhD programs. And so but when anyone is applying for a master's program, I don't expect them to know all the answers about what they want to do. But if they're applying to the PhD program, then I need to know you are 100% committed. This is what what you're getting into. Because the time investment that it takes from us as faculty is incredible. I don't think students realize how much. And so we look for people that are going to finish and that are going to go and then know what they're getting into. But that's something, but that's not the mental space that we necessarily look at for applicants for master's programs. Master's program, you're still, you can be trying to go to a master's program to figure out if you even want to go to a doctoral program. I don't expect those applicants to necessarily have all sort of the answers for everything lined up or anything. And I don't even necessarily expect it from my PhD students all the way. I just need to know, like, this part you are in for. So that's one of the things to kind of just contextualize some of our remarks a little bit in terms of the differences in preparation that are required for doctoral programs versus master's programs. But there are very specialized master's programs where that still applies. So just really, like, there's not anything that just sort of applies for everything. Please think thoughtfully about our advice and how it matches up with the programs and the people that you're interested in working with.
Yeah, thank you so much. So that's pretty much it in terms of kind of the stuff we have prepared. But if you have any questions, it looks like Bethany, if you have a question, we can go ahead and move on to that.
Yes, I do have two questions. So I think I'll ask this first one. So my entire undergrad has been in COVID-19. So it's been all online and asynchronous. And the idea of still reaching out to faculty petrifies me. I'm not really sure why. I think it's just the distance between them. You don't really get the feel for like whether or not it's inviting, etc. So what is your best advice to demystify the fear of reaching out to the faculty for, say, the PhD program or master's program? What is your best advice for that?
Well, my first advice was to actually reach out to faculty that are not associated with the program and just start talking with some faculty so that you have that part a little bit kind of, then you have that some elements of that. I haven't done this in a while, a little out of the way. So I would begin your preparation by starting to connect with faculty here, and you can talk with them about some of your interests and things that, I had a student earlier this semester and I think that we all met with. The student wanted to reach out and meet with pretty much every single faculty member because he was just like, I'm really interested. I want to know what everybody's doing. And he did. He came and had basically an hour-long conversation with most of us. And depending on who he could, and he just wanted to know more. And it was really great because we like sitting there talking, so we're not scary people, when you're coming, if you haven't done one on a test, it's obviously a lot more scary, but we're not scary people by any means. We're here because we love teaching and we love working with students. And so one of the things I would just remind you of that, like, we're here because we love working with all of you and we love teaching all of you. And so, like, we want to see students. We want to have people come. We miss you guys. And so, so part of it would be, don't be afraid and be honest and sort of say, hey, look, I'm coming back, I have this. And then we will completely understand because it's like you and 99% of the other people as well. So one of the things is just say, like, okay, I'm going to do it. And then you go do it. And you can talk. And what I would do is just talk to us about some of your grad school interests and things like that. And that might be the way to help you sort of step forward in that direction. Yeah, 2 to 3 that logically fit is a good. Don't email everybody. Like, that's not something that I recommend. This was a student that was a freshman that was like, I want to meet, it was part of his deliberate plan.
No, sorry, I was answering a question in the
Oh.
chat. It was something similar but different.
Oh yeah,
I
well
would
it is.
say
I
no.
would still reach out to a couple of faculty to begin with.
Right, yeah.
But if it doesn't work out, don't take it personal, because
Right.
as Dr. Bennett, Dr. Levens have mentioned, there's moving pieces. You might have a faculty member moving into an administrative role, or when it's newer and needs, a lot more students to be involved. So if they aren't as receptive, that's okay. Don't take it
Mhm.
personally. Keep kind of moving down the line of the faculty that you've had or that you think that could be interesting to talk to, and just reach out, right? Networking is never going to be harmful. It's always going to be a good thing.
Yeah, the worst that you'll hear is that I can't do it right now because we're like all the classes, but we also, depending upon our position, we have research requirements too. So 50% of about 50% of my time is research. And so if I also have like a super intensive data collection period going on that you wouldn't be able to tell from my classes, I wouldn't necessarily be able to meet as much then, but that's nothing personal. So so I would reach out to people like with time so that it's like, hey, I'd like to meet up with you sometime soon, instead of like next week or something like that. What are the questions you guys got?
Oh, I was going to add one more thing, just because I do hear this from a lot of faculty. Always start out more formal in your reach out. So if you're emailing them, always, hi, Dr. So-and-so, or at least Professor so-and-so, and try and keep very formal emails and interactions. As you start to get to know them, you can maybe get a little more informal, but starting as formal as you can at the beginning is always going to put that best foot forward and give that good impression that you're one, that you can write well and communicate well, and just that you'll be somebody pleasant to interact with.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
there's another question that came in. So if that was related to what Mr. Whitt just finished with, I'm gonna hold off.
Yeah, it was the other piece is, we'd be surprised in terms of when students reach out to us, hey, do you have any TA positions open? Like that's not going to get you very far. So so think about, it's really worth it to put your best foot forward and sort of make the best impression. Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to address the question that came in from Sarah. It asked about PhD programs and health psychology. Do you need a master's first? So one of the things for you to understand is when you're applying to a PhD program, you're going to be applying with the applicant pool has traditional undergraduates, so people who may be just finishing or in their senior year of their bachelor's degree. And then you're going to be applying compared to people who've been out of undergrad for 2 to 3 years, who've been doing research for that time period. And you'll also be applying compared to people who have master's levels. So it is about your total package. So if you as an undergrad were able to get into a lab your freshman, sophomore year, and you were able to do research for 3 years of your undergrad experience, you are going to be just as competitive as somebody who's been working for 2 to 3, likely just as competitive 2 to 3 years outside of after they finish their bachelor's and maybe a master's person. But so this is where it's really hard to say, do you need to have a master's? I mean, if your master's is an applied master's in counseling and you didn't do any research and you don't have any publications, that's not going to help you in a PhD packet. Like what a PhD, especially clinical, if you're thinking clinical health or you're thinking health psych, it's all about research. So if you need to have publications, or maybe not publications, you need to have presentations at conferences. You should be a lead author on at least one. You should be probably a co-author on others. Like it is competitive to get into PhD programs. Usually have at our program here, we usually have about 150 applicants for about 8 spots. So, and like this year, we're only bringing in 6. So like it is really hard, right? That is, I don't know, what is that, a 2%, 3% acceptance rate?
I think we had more. We had over 200 applications.
Do we have over 200 this year? I don't know.
Yeah.
So like it is a pretty low acceptance rate. And if you have, I would just emphasize, if you're going for a PhD program, you need to have demonstrated research ability, whether that's in undergrad, post-undergrad, or through a master's program. That is a research-based master's program, because you can do applied master's programs that don't require a thesis. And that's not going to help you towards a research-based PhD. All right, I'll stop there. Other questions?
Adding to that real fast. I mean, again, it's not a requirement, but you're competing for a limited number of spots, and sometimes it's who's in line in terms of for funding, in terms of like strong students, or it could also be faculty that are like whose students, whose students are in line to receive, like this faculty has, like guaranteed like funding lines from the program because they are junior faculty. And, so there's all sorts of dynamics and things like that. Oh gosh, there was the other piece that I was going to, I can't, oh yeah, that was what I was saying. So when it gets really competitive like that, then it's not whether it's required is maybe not necessarily the question, but how necessary, like how common it is for amongst, all the applicants. And I believe our entire incoming class all has masters. I think that's one of the first times though, because that was not the case for our last so really not at all the case for our last incoming clinical class. I think only one of them had two had a clinical master's, but none of them had research masters. So it's so it's quite dynamic. We did have a question about the Psych D versus the PhD. We're running a little bit low on time. The PhD is research oriented, and you're going to have a mentor match. The Psych D programs are very, very different. They are much more applied, and they don't have the same strong research components. They may have them. It kind of changes. It varies a little bit based on the programs, but it's different. So they're different types of programs, and what you can do with the degrees afterwards is very different. So you want to look at that.
I just add, it depends on the PsyD program. There are more that are becoming more research heavy. So I think you really just need to do your research. You just do your research on the programs you're interested in, and you can identify what their goal is of what they're producing, right? So every program has a goal of what kind of student leads their program. And looking at what they're doing is another place to go, is like, what are these students, where are their graduates, what are they doing with their lives, is another thing. But in the past, I agree 100%, PsyDs have been much more focused on the applied development, much more on the engagement with clients and patients, without necessarily a heavy emphasis on the PhD, but that is switching.
Yeah. And oftentimes research, I have heard a couple of things is shifting, and it's a slightly different change in focus. It's awfully like sort of applied sort of research elements or evidence-based practice research stuff. But yeah, it's definitely want to look at, okay, where are the people graduating from the program going? Is that where you want to be going? And that, and that's, so if, but you can definitely look into both of those. For the IO, we have lots of faculty there, and looking at the websites, looking at the faculty research pages. A final piece to note: often our faculty research pages are actually really quite out of date, and even sometimes our websites are out of date. And so you can see that there. So just look to see if there's recent publications. It's probably much more likely to be so, because with everything that's going on, it has not been a priority for me, for example, during the pandemic, to update my website. So it's much more likely probably right now for there to be much more out of date information on website pages. Thanks everybody for your interest.
Yeah, thank you all for your time. Unfortunately, that is the end. If you do have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'll hopefully continue to do this kind of moving forward into the fall, and kind of do some other different topics. But we hope you all found this helpful and insightful, and we hope you all good luck on your graduate school preparation and everything. And like I said, always feel free to reach out to us if you ever need anything. So have a good day, everyone.
Go Psychology, go Niners.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.